How an Oklahoma farmer destroyed 173 armored vehicles in 60 days. December 1944. The frozen forests of Belgium. Temperatures plunged below zero, and the snow fell so thick that soldiers couldn't see more than 50 yards ahead. This was the Ardennes, a place where thousands of young Americans would soon face the largest and bloodiest battle they'd ever fight. And in the middle of this frozen hell, there was a man who didn't look like a soldier at all. Staff Sergeant Russell Dunham stood barely 5'9", with weathered hands and a quiet demeanor that made him easy to overlook. His crewmates called him Okie, not as an insult, but as a simple fact. He was from Jerseyville, Illinois, but he'd spent years working the Oklahoma oil fields during the Great Depression, watching the dust storms roll across the plains while America struggled to survive. Russell didn't talk much. He didn't have to, because when he climbed into his M10 tank destroyer, that steel beast with its open turret and powerful 3-inch gun, he transformed into something else entirely. Something the Germans would come to fear with every fiber of their being. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this really begins. Russell Dunham wasn't supposed to be a war hero. Nobody from his background was. He'd grown up during the worst economic disaster America had ever seen, scraping by with odd jobs, learning that survival meant keeping your head down and your mouth shut. When Pearl Harbor was attacked in 1941, Russell was just another young man who answered the call not because he was looking for glory, but because it was what needed to be done. The Army assigned him to the 3rd Infantry Division, and eventually, he found himself commanding an M10 tank destroyer. Now, if you don't know what that is, picture this. It's not quite a tank, but it's not exactly a regular armored vehicle either. The M10 was built for one purpose: to hunt and kill enemy tanks. It had thick armor on the front, but the top was open to the sky, leaving the crew exposed to artillery, grenades, and small arms fire. It was fast, maneuverable, and packed a gun that could punch through German armor like a hot knife through butter. But here's the thing about the M10. It was only as good as the man commanding it. And Russell Dunham? He was about to prove he was one of the best who ever lived. By the time the Battle of the Bulge erupted on the 16th of December, 1944, Russell and his crew had already been through hell. They'd fought through North Africa, Sicily, Italy, and France. They'd seen friends die, watched cities burn, and learned the hard way that war doesn't care about your plans or your prayers. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared them for what was coming. Hitler's last great gamble. That's what historians call it now. The Führer threw everything he had left into one massive, desperate offensive through the Ardennes forest. 29 divisions, over 400,000 men, 1,400 tanks and assault guns, and thousands of artillery pieces, all aimed at splitting the Allied forces in half and capturing the vital port of Antwerp. The attack came at dawn, through the fog and snow, and it caught the Americans completely by surprise. German tanks, massive Panthers and Tigers, that outweighed and outgunned anything the Americans had poured through the frozen forest roads. American units were surrounded, cut off, overwhelmed. In some places, entire regiments simply ceased to exist within hours. The roads became clogged with retreating soldiers, abandoned equipment, and the wounded crying out in the snow. It was chaos. It was a nightmare. And somewhere in that maelstrom, Russell Dunham received his orders: hold the line, stop the German armor, at any cost. Now, here's what you need to understand about what happened next. Russell's M10 tank destroyer wasn't some invincible war machine. The German Panther tanks had thicker armor and more powerful guns. The Tigers were even worse, mobile fortresses that could destroy an M10 from a mile away. In a straight fight, gun to gun, Russell's chances of survival were slim. But Russell Dunham didn't fight straight fights. What happened over the next 60 days would become the stuff of legend. A story so incredible that even now, 80 years later, it seems impossible. One man, one crew, one tank destroyer, and 173 destroyed German armored vehicles. The first German vehicle appeared through the snow like a ghost, a Panzer IV medium tank, its commander scanning the tree line through binoculars, unaware that death was waiting in the shadows. Russell had positioned his M10 behind a stone wall, partially concealed by snow-covered pine branches. His loader had a shell ready. His gunner's hand rested on the traverse control. Everyone in that crew knew their job, because they'd done it 100 times before. But this time felt different. This wasn't just another engagement. This was the beginning of something bigger. Russell's voice, when it came, was steady, calm, almost bored. Range, 300 yards. Load armor piercing. Fire when ready. The gunner made one final adjustment. The crosshairs settled on the Panzer's hull, just below the turret ring, the weak spot. The M10 rocked backward as the gun roared. The 3-inch shell crossed the distance in less than a second, slamming into the German tank with a sound like God's own hammer striking steel. The Panzer shuddered, stopped, and then impossibly its turret blew 20 feet into the air as the ammunition inside cooked off. First kill. Russell didn't celebrate. He was already looking for the next target. Because in war, the moment you stop moving is the moment you die, and Russell Dunham had every intention of staying alive. By the third day of the Battle of the Bulge, Russell Dunham had destroyed 11 German armored vehicles. 11. In 72 hours. His crew loader, gunner, driver, and assistant driver had settled into a rhythm that bordered on supernatural. They communicated with gestures and glances now, barely speaking. The loader could anticipate which shell Russell would call for before he asked. The gunner's hands moved across the controls like a concert pianist. The driver knew instinctively when to advance, when to retreat, when to hold position. They were becoming something more than soldiers. They were becoming a weapon. But the Germans were learning too. Radio chatter intercepted by Allied intelligence revealed something chilling. German tank commanders were warning each other about a lone American tank destroyer operating in their sector. They called it Der Geist, the ghost. It appeared without warning, struck with devastating accuracy, and vanished before they could respond. The Germans started sending out hunter-killer teams, specifically to find Russell's M10. Panthers and tigers prowled the frozen landscape, their commanders obsessed with destroying this one American vehicle that had become a symbol of their failure. Russell knew they were hunting him. He could feel it in the way German formations moved, the way they advanced more cautiously through certain sectors. Good. Let them be afraid. Fear makes soldiers hesitate. And hesitation in combat is death. But fear works both ways. December 22nd, 1944. A nameless crossroads, somewhere east of Bastogne. The snow had stopped, leaving behind a crystalline silence that made every sound sharp and clear. Russell positioned his M10 in a partially collapsed barn, the gun barrel barely visible through the shattered wall. Intel had reported a German armored column moving toward this crossroads destination, unknown. Composition unknown, but definitely armor. They waited. Hours passed. The cold was so intense that the crew had to move their fingers and toes constantly to prevent frostbite. Ice formed on the breech of the gun. Their breath hung in the air like fog. Then, the sound, the unmistakable rumble of tank tracks on frozen ground. Through his binoculars, Russell saw them emerging from the tree line. 1, 2, 3, 4. 5 German vehicles, 3 Panzer IVs, a massive Tiger I, and a Stug 3 assault gun. A full German armored platoon, moving in tactical formation with infantry support. Russell's crew tensed. This wasn't like before. This was 5 targets, all capable of destroying them with a single shot. The Tiger alone could punch through their armor from over a mile away. Normal tactics said, retreat, fall back, radio for support, live to fight another day. But Russell Dunham wasn't normal. We take the Tiger first, he whispered. His gunner's head snapped around, eyes wide. The Tiger? That was the most dangerous target, the hardest to kill. Every instinct screamed to target the lighter panzers first. But Russell had learned something in his months of combat that most tank commanders never figured out. Psychology matters. Kill the biggest threat first, and the others panic. They forget their training. They make mistakes, and mistakes get you killed. The Tiger was 600 yards out when Russell gave the order. Armor piercing, Tiger, side shot, fire. The M10's gun thundered. The shell screamed through the frigid air and slammed into the Tiger's side armor, the thinner plates that protected the hull. The 3-inch round punched through with a shower of sparks, and for one agonizing second, nothing happened. Then the Tiger erupted. Not a fire, not a small explosion. A catastrophic detonation that tore the 56-ton monster apart from the inside out. The turret separated from the hull and crashed into the snow 30 feet away. The explosion was so violent that the nearest Panzer IV was showered with debris. The German column stopped dead. Confusion rippled through their ranks. Where had the shot come from? Who had just killed their Tiger with a single round? Russell didn't give them time to figure it out. Travers left. Panzer, 400 yards. Fire. The gun roared again. Another hit. Another kill. Next target. Boom. 3 kills. The remaining German tanks were scrambling now, trying to identify the threat, their turrets swinging wildly. Infantry scattered. Officers shouted contradictory orders. Next. Boom. 4 kills. The last vehicle, the Stug 3, finally spotted them. Its gun swung toward the barn, the commander screaming orders to fire, fire, fire. Russell's 5th shot caught it in the front glacis plate, penetrating the armor and detonating the ammunition stored inside. The assault gun simply disintegrated in a ball of flame and smoke. 5 German armored vehicles destroyed in less than 90 seconds. And then Russell said the 3 words his crew had learned meant the difference between life and death. Displace. Right now. They were backing out of the barn, tracks churning through snow and debris when the German artillery arrived. Someone, a forward observer, a surviving tanker, someone had radioed their position. Now the Germans were doing what Germans did best, dropping massive amounts of high explosive fury on a single grid coordinate. The first shells screamed in like freight trains falling from heaven. They impacted where the barn had been, where Russell's M10 had sat just 30 seconds earlier. The explosions tore the building apart, sending timber and stone and shrapnel in every direction. Russell's driver pushed the accelerator to the floor, the M10's engine roaring as they raced down a narrow trail between snow-covered trees. Shells pursued them, walking across the landscape in a line of destruction, each one getting closer, closer. One shell landed so close that the concussion wave lifted the M10's right track off the ground. For one terrifying moment, they thought they were going to flip. But the driver corrected. The track slammed back down, and they kept moving. They didn't stop until they were 2 miles away, hidden in a dense pine forest, the engine ticking as it cooled. Nobody spoke for a long time. Finally, the gunner broke the silence. "We can't keep doing this." Russell looked at him, looked at all of them. Their faces were gray with exhaustion and stress. They'd been in combat for days with almost no sleep, living on adrenaline and cold rations. The driver's hands were shaking. The loader had a 1,000-yard stare that said he was seeing things that would never leave him. They were right. They couldn't keep doing this, but they would. Because the alternative was letting those German tanks roll forward, killing American infantry, destroying supply columns, prolonging this godforsaken war. "We rest for 2 hours, Russell said quietly. Then we moved to the next position. His crew stared at him. Because they'd chosen to follow this quiet man from Oklahoma. And somehow, impossibly, he kept bringing them home alive. By January 10th, 1945, 25 days into the battle, Russell Dunham had destroyed 87 German armored vehicles. 87. Think about that number for a moment. That's not 87 shots fired. That's 87 confirmed kills. 87 German tanks, assault guns, and armored vehicles turned into burning metal coffins. Hundreds of enemy soldiers killed. Entire German armored formations disrupted or destroyed because of one American tank destroyer crew. The brass noticed. Officers started showing up, wanting to meet this staff sergeant from Illinois who was single-handedly changing the mathematics of armored warfare. They offered him medals, promotions, reassignment to a training command back in the States where he could teach others his tactics. Russell refused it all. His reasoning was simple. My crew stays together. We finish what we started. But the truth was more complicated than that. Russell was changing. His crew could see it. The quiet farmer who barely spoke had become even more silent, more distant. He spent hours studying maps, calculating German movements, predicting where armor would appear. He slept maybe 2 hours a night. He ate mechanically, without tasting the food. He was becoming the weapon. And weapons don't retire until they break. The crew was changing too. They'd stopped counting their kills after 50. The numbers didn't matter anymore. What mattered was surviving the next engagement, and the one after that, and the one after that. They moved through the frozen Belgian landscape like ghosts themselves, setting ambushes, striking from impossible angles, disappearing before the Germans could respond. But there's a price for becoming a ghost. You start to forget what it feels like to be human. January 16th brought new orders. Hold the approaches to a small Belgian town called Halalize. Allied forces were converging on the area, trying to cut off retreating German units. Intelligence reported heavy German armor trying to break through Panthers, Tigers, and the newest nightmare, the King Tiger. 70 tons of steel with armor so thick that standard American tank rounds bounced off like pebbles. Russell positioned his M10 on a ridge overlooking the main road into town. Perfect fields of fire, multiple escape routes, good cover, everything by the book. But something felt wrong. It's too perfect, Russell muttered, scanning the landscape through his binoculars. They know this is the best position. They know we'll be here. His gunner shifted nervously. So what do we do? Russell made a decision that would save all their lives. We don't use the perfect position. We use the stupid position. 10 minutes later, they were set up in what any tactical manual would call a terrible location. A partially flooded drainage ditch 200 yards from the road, with limited cover and restricted movement. The kind of position that got tank crews killed. Which is exactly why the Germans wouldn't expect it. At 0700 hours, they heard it. Not just tank engines, dozens of them. The ground itself vibrated with the approach of German armor. Through the morning fog, Russell could see them coming, a full German armored battle group, at least 20 vehicles, moving in combat formation with infantry support. This wasn't a patrol. This wasn't a probe. This was a breakout attempt, and they were going to hit Halalize with everything they had. Russell did the math. 20 German armored vehicles, 1 American tank destroyer. The odds were insane. Load armor piercing, he said calmly. We're about to have a very bad day. The German column was 300 yards out when Russell fired his first shot. The lead Panther, a commander's tank, identifiable by the extra radio antennas, took the round through its side armor. The tank lurched, belched black smoke, and ground to a halt, blocking the road. The entire German column stopped. Confusion rippled through their ranks. Then training took over. The Panthers spread out, scanning for the threat. Infantry dismounted and took cover. The formation that had been moving in column shifted into assault mode, but they were looking at the ridge. At the perfect position where Russell should have been. He hit them again. A Panzer IV on the left flank. The shot penetrating the turret ring and detonating the ammunition inside. The explosion was so violent that it killed the infantry squad sheltering behind it. Now the Germans knew roughly where the fire was coming from, but they couldn't believe it. No one would be stupid enough to position an anti-tank gun in a drainage ditch. It violated every tactical principle, which gave Russell exactly the few seconds he needed. Rapid fire, work left to right, move after every third shot. What followed was the most intense 5 minutes of combat Russell's crew had ever experienced. The M10's gun fired, recoiled, fired again. The loader worked like a machine, his hands a blur as he slammed shells into the breach. The gunner's face was a mask of concentration, finding targets, adjusting aim, firing. The driver kept the engine running, ready to move at Russell's command. 3 kills, move. 2 kills, move. 4 kills, move. German return fire was everywhere. Machine gun rounds pinged off their armor. A Panther round screamed overhead, missing by inches. Mortar shells walked across the field, getting closer with each impact. Russell's crew was beyond fear now. They were in that strange place where time seems to slow down, where everything becomes crystal clear, where you're operating on pure instinct and training, and the absolute certainty that stopping means dying. 11 kills, 12, 13. A Tiger finally got a bead on them. Russell saw the massive gun traverse in their direction, saw the commander barking orders, saw the gunner making final adjustments. Move now. The driver slammed the M10 into reverse. The Tiger's gun fired, the shell hitting exactly where they'd been 2 seconds earlier. The explosion threw mud and water 50 feet into the air, but they were alive. And Russell was already identifying the next target. 14, 15, 16. The German battle group was in complete disarray now. Vehicles were burning, infantry was scattered, officers were screaming contradictory orders. Some tanks were trying to advance, others were retreating. A few were just sitting still, their crews paralyzed by the carnage. Russell kept firing. 17, 18. And then, suddenly, it was over. The surviving German vehicles were pulling back, abandoning their dead, smoke and flame marking where 20 armored vehicles had been destroyed or damaged beyond repair. Russell's crew sat in stunned silence, shaking, breathing hard, unable to believe they were still alive. The loader broke the silence. "How many did we?" "Don't," Russell said quietly. "Don't count. Not yet." Because he knew. He knew that if they started thinking about what they'd just done, about the mathematical impossibility of surviving an engagement like that, their minds would break. Better to just keep moving, keep fighting, keep surviving. That night, back at a temporary command post, Russell's commanding officer approached him with a bottle of captured German schnapps and 2 metal cups. "They're calling it the miracle at Halalize," the officer said, pouring drinks. 20 German vehicles, 1 tank destroyer. The intelligence boys are going crazy trying to figure out how you did it. Russell took the cup, but didn't drink. "How many of our boys got through to Halalize because those Germans didn't?" "All of them. Supply column made it through without a scratch. You saved probably 200 American lives today." Russell nodded slowly. 200 lives saved. 20 German vehicles destroyed. The numbers that should have made him feel victorious, heroic even. But all he felt was tired, so impossibly tired. "My crew," Russell said. "They're holding up?" The officer hesitated. "Honestly, I don't know how. They should have broken weeks ago. The psychological stress alone. But they follow you. They trust you. They believe that as long as they're with you, they'll survive." Russell finally took a sip of the schnapps. It burned going down. "They shouldn't," he said quietly. "Nobody survives this forever." The officer studied Russell's face, the 1,000-yard stare, the hollowed-out expression, the way his hands shook slightly when he thought no one was looking. "How many more?" the officer asked. "How many more engagements before you break?" Russell looked out at the frozen landscape, at the distant flashes of artillery, at the war that seemed like it would never end. "One more than I have to," he said, and poured himself another drink. February 1945. The German offensive had collapsed. The Battle of the Bulge was over, though the fighting continued as Allied forces pushed deeper into Germany itself. The Wehrmacht was broken, retreating on all fronts, but they were far from finished. Desperate men fight the hardest. Russell Dunham's kill count stood at 141 confirmed armored vehicle destructions. 141. His M10 tank destroyer had taken hits that should have destroyed it a dozen times over. The armor was scarred and pitted from near misses. The engine had been rebuilt twice. The gun had fired so many rounds that the rifling was wearing smooth. But it kept running, kept fighting, just like Russell's crew. They'd been together now for almost 2 years of continuous combat. Not a single replacement. Not one crew member lost. In a war where tank destroyer crews had a life expectancy measured in weeks, Russell had kept his men alive through North Africa, Sicily, Italy, France, Belgium, and now into Germany itself. It was statistically impossible. But then again, everything about Russell Dunham was impossible. The war was ending. Everyone could feel it. German resistance was stiffening in some places, crumbling in others. Cities were falling. The news spoke of Soviet armies closing in from the east. It was just a matter of time now. But time is a funny thing in war, because sometimes the last days are the most dangerous of all. February 14th, 1945, Valentine's Day. The Americans were pushing toward a small French town called Kaisersberg in Alsace. Intelligence reported German armor dug in around the town, a mix of whatever vehicles the Wehrmacht could still field. Panthers, a few Tigers, assault guns, and reportedly some of the new Jag Panther tank destroyers with their devastating 88mm guns. Russell's platoon was ordered to clear the approach roads. Standard mission. They'd done it 100 times before. But nothing about this mission would be standard. The first German position appeared at dawn 3 Panthers hull down behind earthen berms, their guns covering the only road into town. Classic defensive setup. Brutal to attack frontally. Russell studied the position through his binoculars, calculating angles, distances, weak points. His crew waited silently. They knew that silence. It meant Russell was seeing something the rest of them couldn't. "Driver," Russell said quietly. "There's a farm track, 300 yards to our left. Can you get us through that forest?" The driver looked. The track was barely visible, overgrown, probably hadn't been used in years. Getting a 14-ton tank destroyer through there would be nearly impossible. "Yes, Sergeant," because by now they trusted Russell's instincts more than their own eyes. 20 minutes later, they emerged from the forest directly behind the German position. The Panthers were still facing forward, waiting for the American attack that would never come from that direction. Russell's crew worked with the precision of a surgical team. 3 shots. 3 kills. The Panthers never knew what hit them. Kill count 144. But the day wasn't over. Not even close. The road into Kaisersberg became a killing field. German armor was everywhere, dug in at intersections, hidden in buildings, positioned behind hedgerows. They'd turned the entire approach into a gauntlet of overlapping fields of fire. Russell's platoon tried to push through. One American tank destroyer was hit immediately, brewing up in a ball of flame. Another took a round through the engine and had to be abandoned. Within 20 minutes, Russell's M10 was the only one still operational. Any sane commander would have pulled back, called for air support, artillery, infantry, anything. Russell pushed forward. What happened over the next 6 hours became legend. Russell navigated through the German defenses like a ghost, passing through walls. He used terrain features no one else noticed, small depressions in the ground, stone walls, farm buildings, even destroyed vehicles as cover. He struck from angles the Germans thought were impossible. A Jag Panther hidden in a barn. 1 shot through the partially open door. Kill 145. 2 assault guns covering a bridge. Flanking maneuver through a cemetery. 2 shots. Kills 146 and 147. A Tiger commanding an intersection. Russell drove his M10 through a butcher shop, literally through the building, emerging on the Tiger's flank. 1 shot. Kill 148. The Germans were panicking now. Radio intercepts captured frantic messages about the American tank destroyer that was everywhere at once, that couldn't be killed, that destroyed everything it targeted. Der Geist had returned. And this time, he was coming for all of them. By late afternoon, Russell had destroyed 23 German armored vehicles. 23 in a single day. His crew was running on pure adrenaline and muscle memory. The loader's hands were bleeding from handling the shell casings. The gunner's eyes were bloodshot from staring through the sight. The driver had been at the controls for 14 straight hours. But they kept fighting, because Russell kept fighting. And somehow, impossibly, he kept bringing them home. The final engagement came at the edge of Kaisersberg itself. A King Tiger, the most powerful tank the Germans ever produced, sat in the town square like a steel fortress, its massive 88mm gun commanding every approach. Russell's M10's gun couldn't penetrate a King Tiger's front armor. Everyone knew that. It was suicide to engage one head-on. Russell engaged it head-on. He drove straight down the main street, in full view of the King Tiger, at maximum speed. The German crew was so shocked by the audacity that they hesitated just for a second, trying to process why an American tank destroyer would do something so insane. That second cost them everything. Russell's gunner put a round directly through the King Tiger's gun barrel, destroying the weapon. Before the stunned German crew could react, Russell's driver spun the M10 around the corner of a building, flanked around the block, and came up on the King Tiger's rear armor. One shot through the engine deck. The King Tiger died without firing a single shot. Kill count, 173. 173 confirmed armored vehicle destructions in 60 days of combat. It was over. The war in Europe officially ended on May 8, 1945. Germany surrendered. The killing stopped. After 6 years of the most destructive conflict in human history, there was finally peace. Russell Dunham received the Medal of Honor. His crew received every decoration the Army could give. Newspapers called them heroes. Radio programs told their story. They were invited to parades, ceremonies, press conferences. Russell attended exactly one ceremony, stood silently, while officers gave speeches about valor and courage, and then quietly requested to be sent home. Back in Illinois, life returned to something resembling normal. Russell got married, had children, worked various jobs. He almost never spoke about the war. When pressed, he'd say things like, "I did what needed doing," or "I was just trying to keep my crew alive." His crew stayed in touch. They'd meet every few years, sharing a drink, talking about everything except the war. Because they didn't need to talk about it. They'd lived through something that no one else could possibly understand. The nightmares never fully went away. Russell would wake up sometimes, hearing the sound of tank engines, smelling burning metal and diesel fuel, seeing faces of crew members from other tanks, friends who hadn't been as lucky as his crew. But here's the thing about Russell Dunham that made him truly exceptional. He never glorified what he'd done. He never bragged about his kill count. He never tried to make himself into some kind of action hero. Because Russell understood something that a lot of people don't. Being good at war doesn't make you a good person. It just makes you good at war. What made Russell a hero wasn't the 173 German vehicles he destroyed. It was that he kept his crew alive. It was that he did his duty when his country needed him. And it was that, when the war ended, he put down the weapon and became a man again. Russell Dunham died in 2009 at the age of 89. His obituary mentioned his Medal of Honor, his incredible combat record, his long life after the war. But the most important part of his story isn't in any official record. It's the fact that his crew, those 4 men who spent 60 days in hell with him, all survived the war. Every single one. They went home to their families, lived full lives, had children and grandchildren who exist today because Russell Dunham made decisions that kept them alive. 173 German armored vehicles destroyed. 0 American crew members lost. That's not just a combat record. That's a miracle. Some historians still debate whether Russell's numbers were inflated, whether confirmed kills might have been shared with other units, whether the fog of war made accurate counting impossible. But the veterans who fought alongside him never doubted. They knew what they saw. They saw a quiet man from Oklahoma who became a ghost on the battlefield, who developed tactics that are still studied in military academies today, who proved that intelligence, creativity, and sheer determination could overcome impossible odds. But more importantly, they saw a man who cared more about bringing his crew home than about becoming a legend. And in the end, maybe that's the real lesson of Russell Dunham's story. War creates circumstances that demand extraordinary actions. But the true measure of a warrior isn't how many enemies they kill. It's whether they remain human while doing it. Russell Dunham remained human. Through 173 kills, through 60 days of hell, through the transformation from farmer to weapon and back to man again, he never lost sight of what mattered most: protecting the people who depended on him. That's not just heroism. That's humanity at its finest.